Good evening, everyone. I wanted to welcome you. My name is Paula. Tonight's subject I wanted to address because there is a growing fascination with owning and collecting haunted objects. And a lot of people don't realize that there can be really great dangers and a lot of consequences involved in owning these types or even inheriting objects from a departed family member. And those objects kind of come into some pretty broad, the main categories that are involved are dolls, ritual objects, jewelry, furniture, houses or property, and then what I call like tchotchkes, like icons and other little things that you can't really kind of determine. And so I'm going to kind of break down these different groups and kind of explain like some of the history, and then there are a few of the categories that I actually have personal experience with, both from a family perspective and then from a paranormal investigation perspective. So the first kind of thing that I really wanted to address is the category of dolls. A lot of people want to collect dolls. And through history, dolls were originally created, and this is, through archaeological proof and everything, dolls were not originally toys. A lot of times dolls were used as teaching tools because the history was oral. They were also used in ritual. They were used in funereal rites. They were used, as effigies and things like that, but they did not really come into use as toys until about 100 AD. So, when you think about a doll, you automatically think about a toy. And then you also think about, the typical kind of like modern day toy that's, like a porcelain doll or something like that. And those are very, very popular for people to collect. Now, what can happen? A lot of times, the dolls were used in, and they still are used in ritual magic. And this is kind of a form of what's called low magic. And they're used as puppets. And this can be anything like from a Native American doll made out of corn husk. I am a witch. I have used a, dollar store Barbie doll and used one to bind someone from hurting me. I'm sure some of you that belong to another group have heard Marta refer to the chill out spell. Well, that's one of my spells. And there were at one time, a couple of Barbie dolls in my freezer of people that I needed to have chill out, especially like a Ken doll that was, my ex-husband, because he was stalking me and threatening me when we were going through our divorce, and it worked. So he chilled out. But what you don't realize is that then there is residual energy attached to those puppets. People automatically think of voodoo dolls when you think of dolls that are used in magic. And that's kind of a misnomer because proper voodoo out of Haiti, they do not use dolls. What involved the use of dolls was in African hoodoo, or what is also known as Southern conjure, and things that are kind of more popular that were brought with the slaves to the southern part of the United States. And that involved a lot of bringing the dolls here. Okay, so those effigies and things like that were a part of what is known as low magic. And they do involve a lot of residual energy. Because in magic, what magic is all about, and witchcraft, voodoo, hoodoo, Satanism, and various types of magic, it is all about building energy, containing it, and then releasing it with a specific intent in mind. So if you're releasing that energy and containing it into a doll, and you're focusing all that energy into a doll, especially if it's negative energy, like with Satanism or something like that, that's a lot of quote unquote bad juju, or a hoodoo doll. That's bad juju. There are a couple of really kind of famous dolls. I mean, these dolls have risen to fame or become infamous, for lack of a better term. And I'm sure a lot of you, if you're followers of the paranormal, you've heard of Annabelle. And Annabelle is basically a Raggedy Ann doll. She popped up, believe it or not, through Ed and Lorraine Warren. So if you guys have ever seen episodes of like Paranormal State with Ryan Buell, you've seen Lorraine on there. Or if you've seen the movie The Conjuring, Lorraine actually made a cameo appearance in the beginning of the movie. Yes, Alex, early dolls were made from the deceased hair and some baby teeth, and they were given to the family. Exactly. Ed and Lorraine found this doll, a Raggedy Ann doll, and I believe it was either in the late 60s or early 70s, and they attributed all this activity to this Raggedy Ann doll. It is currently, it was supposedly cursed by a magical ritual, and contained energy from a previous owner. A lot of people think that it's just a bunch of hooey with this particular doll, because a lot of people are naysayers where Ed and Lorraine Warren are concerned. And this doll is currently housed in the Warren's Occult Museum in Monroe, Connecticut. There have been several shows done on it. I know Ghost Adventures did one on Annabelle not all that long ago. There's also one called Robert the Doll, and it was originally owned by an artist, and trying to read my notes here. And it was made by Steiff and Company. So if any of you are familiar with like teddy bears, Steiff is a maker, German maker of very famous teddy bears. So it was originally owned by Robert Eugene Otto, and supposedly this doll moves on its own, changes its expression, makes giggling sounds, and brings misfortune to everyone that owns it. And if you disrespect the doll, supposedly you can get possessed. And it resides in East Mariello Museum in Key West. Now, Alex and I happen to have experience, and this is a very interesting case that happened here in Virginia, and it involved a young lady that was in one of the paranormal investigation groups that we worked with. And she had over 100 haunted dolls. And this young lady had, I'm going to put this, she was very high on, she was a high functioning autistic. So, she was on the autism spectrum, but she was higher functioning on the autism spectrum. And she did an EVP session in her room with these dolls, and literally it was like a chatterbox of numerous voices. And when Alex heard the EVPs from this EVP session, he was like, oh my God, we have got to help this young lady, because even her parents, there was stuff flying off the walls in the house, stuff, getting thrown off the mantles. Her parents were very concerned about stuff that were happening in the house. And it took quite a while, but Alex was able to contact, I'm sure you guys, if you ever heard of the show, The Haunted Collector. That was a show that was on one of the channels. I can't remember which one, maybe the Travel Channel, I think. And it was on there for, I think, 3 or 4 seasons. And it involved a gentleman named John Zaffis, Zaffis. And he owns a haunted objects museum. I believe he's out of Connecticut. Correct me in the chat if I'm wrong, Alex. And he's also he's very well knowledged on, in demonology and things like that. He's a very good paranormal investigator. The show, the way that it was edited and cut, really did not do his skills justice. Anyhow, Alex was able to contact John Zaffis and told him exactly what was going on with these dolls. And we were finally able to convince this young lady to give up a portion of her collection to John Zaffis and give them to his museum. Now, John Zaffis and I believe one other person came down here in a van from Connecticut and came here to Virginia to pick these dolls up that she had agreed to let go of. Now, on the way back, these dolls, John stopped at a hotel and conducted an EVP session. And in that EVP session, it came up, die, John, die. The next day, when they got on the road on the Pennsylvania Turnpike, the whole rear end fell out of Mr. Zaffis's basically brand new van. And they had a really bad wreck. Luckily, no one was seriously injured. But that can tell you the powers of these things. Now, to keep going on with the story, when Alex had contacted Mr. Zaffis on the telephone on one occasion about these dolls, his ear started hurting really bad. And he couldn't understand what was going on, and he, just kept talking, didn't think too much about it. But when he got off the phone, he realized that his face and neck on the side was wet, and his ear had been bleeding where he had been talking on the phone to John Zaffis for no reason whatsoever. He didn't have an injury to his ear. He had no ear infection. He had nothing going on. Fast forward a little bit. Oh yeah, and he had 3 little cuts on his ear. And usually when you see things in 3, that tends to be a mocking of the Trinity. So just keep that in mind. Fast forward a little bit. Alex had a conversation with another fellow paranormal investigator in our group, and that paranormal investigator's ear started bleeding when they started talking about these dolls. He did not know that Alex's ear had been bleeding when he talked to John Zaffis. Fast forward a little bit. Alex calls me to talk about these dolls, and I didn't know anything about his ear, and my ear started bleeding when we started talking about these stupid dolls. So haunted objects are nothing to joke about. Fast forward a little bit. This young lady yeah, exactly. Thank God you never liked dolls. Fast forward, they actually showed in, I believe, the 2nd season of The Haunted Collector, they actually showed them bringing these dolls into the shop in like the season's first or 2nd episode. This young lady happened to see them unboxing her dolls on camera and wigged out and made them send the dolls back. So after that, we have not had any contact with this particular person again, because she was clearly not going to give those dolls up. She was, I don't know how she is to this day. They had formed such an attachment to her. I mean, it was literally like, listening to a nursery crying and stuff in EVP sessions and like. So, you have to be very careful, especially with, dolls that are older, that, may have human hair and stuff with them. A lot of times, when a child died, especially, and I'll touch on this a little bit, in Victorian eras, especially, porcelain dolls came into fashion in the Victorian era, especially in the mid 1800s. And Victorians were pretty much obsessed with death and the occult. And so they made jewelry out of hair of deceased. It was called mourning jewelry. And they also tended to, incorporate hair into dolls and stuff to keep parts of, babies that had passed on and stuff, as a memento of their children, because it was so common for, children to die or be stillborn or something like that. So, just be very careful if you are a doll collector. The next thing that a lot of people, and it just boggles my mind, like to collect are what I call ritual or magical objects. And you see a lot of this like on eBay and such as that. And like I said, witches, whether you call yourself a Wiccan or whatever, Satanists, voodoo, hoodoo, conjure, any kind of any kind of magical tool, be it a wand, a ritual knife or athame, a ritual sword, something called a bolin, which is a small curved knife that almost looks like a little sickle, a besom or a broom, anything like that, poppets, anything like that. All about magic is building energy with a specific intent and releasing that energy into the world to manifest itself. I liken a spell in Wicca, witchcraft, whatever you want, almost like to a very intense prayer to, Judeo-Christians. So, that's the kind of thing that you can kind of put it on the same level. Now, when you project and work that much energy, you leave a residual behind of that intent at purpose. So if, I'm a good person and I'm a good witch, I'm Glenda the Good Witch, then, the chances of getting a hold of something really nasty attached to my ritual tools is very, very low. However, if you get a hold of somebody who dabbles in the dark, who is into Satanism, who is into necromancy, which is trying to control and raise the dead to do your bidding, who is trying to raise demons to do their bidding, any number of dark things where you're trying to bend the will of another to do your bidding, that's got a whole lot of bad energy associated with it. And unless that ritual tool is properly cleansed, dealt with, and whatever, and some of them, you can't cleanse them. You just can't. There's just too much bad in them to get them cleansed. So you need to get that out of your mind right there. So there is actually a ritual sword that is currently owned by the Traveling Museum of the Paranormal. And it was originally in Kentucky. And they were contacted by the parents. And their son had been using this ritual sword to summon demons and perform satanic rituals. So when he was around this sword, it gave him, like almost bloodlust to either hurt himself or go off and hurt others. So it gave him the urge to kill. So they ended up taking this sword in and put it into their paranormal museum. Now, the thing of it is, the Traveling Paranormal Museum allows you to touch a lot of the objects that are in there. This is one of the objects. I believe there are 2 objects in there that you are not allowed to touch anymore, because everybody who touched this sword were overcome by violence, wanting to do harm to others, and literally like wanting to do harm to themselves. Now, when Alex and I have personal experience with a ritual sword that we pinpointed at an investigation outside of a town called Front Royal here in Virginia. And we were contacted and worked with another group. And this woman was, just distraught because her son had some issues going on. There was weird stuff happening in the house, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, if you remember last week's show, I said, one of our primary things, the first thing we try to do is debunk. Well, we were able to debunk several things, except when we went into that little boy's room, I was automatically drawn over to the left, and I noticed a dagger on the wall that had a goat's head on it, which is the god Baphomet. And Baphomet was a god that was basically co-opted by Aleister Crowley when he, made Satanism a big thing. And Alex put the EMF, I told you about our really, nice Mel meters that we have. He put his Mel meter up to that dagger, and it started. There were no electrical sources anywhere around this thing. There was nothing that would have given off any sort of EMF around this dagger that was on the wall mounted in this little boy's room. The EMF started out at 1.4 milligauss and it went up to 3.6 milligauss. This is unheard of for an inanimate object that, doesn't have, a regular object like, my glasses, that does not have electricity running through it. The little boy's, I believe it was his uncle, had got this thing at a yard sale or something like that for $5. He thought it was kind of cool, gave it to the little boy. They mounted it, put it up on the wall. Alex took it down off the wall, put it on the bed where there was absolutely no way that there were electrical cords running behind it or anything like that, and we still got readings on the Mel meter. So all that bad stuff that was like in this kid's room and the bad junk in the house that was going on was because of this ritualistic dagger. Now, Paula knowing what she knows and Alex knowing what he knows, we knew that we could not cleanse or destroy that knife to do anything. We could not do anything to remedy the situation other than to tell the mother to get rid of that stupid knife. And what we told her to do, and that's kind of evil of us, we told her to take it to the pawn shop and hawk it and let it be somebody else's problem. And tell them that it was a haunted object and that they could get more money for it that way if they marketed it that way. And just let people know that this was a satanic knife, that it's a haunted object, and they can get more money for it that way. And if somebody's dumb enough to buy it, then it's going to be their problem to deal with. But to immediately alleviate the issue, that was the only thing that we could do. Now, she also had a couple other things going on in the house that she had to do to take care of an electrical issue. And one other thing, and as soon as she did that and removed that knife from that house, nothing. Everything went away. Everything was fine and hunky-dory after that. So these objects can really, really affect you and affect your family in an extremely negative way. Another big thing that is extremely popular is haunted mirrors in furniture. There's two really, really famous kind of pieces of furniture, and one of them is the Dybbuk box, and it's actually a wine cabinet. And it was um, originally owned by a Holocaust survivor. And you've probably seen it, I believe, on Ghost Adventures. Yeah, because it's Zach Bagans has this Dybbuk box in his museum out in Las Vegas. And it was originally owned by a Holocaust survivor. And it was bought in Spain after the Holocaust. And Dybbuk in Hebrew is, I believe it's Hebrew for restless spirit, that is of a malicious nature that can possess a living thing. And there was I forget the name of the symbol that was inscribed in the back of the cabinet, but it was a Hebrew symbol. So they put it in Zach Bagans' museum, and that's where it is. It's like protected where nobody can touch it. You know, everybody who has like owned it, had it, has had, you know, really horrific things happen to them, possessions, I mean, the whole gamut. So it was really a rabbi came and like rebound it in according to like Kabbalah ritual to bind the demon back in the cabinet that evidently was in it. And another one that is very famous is Bela Lugosi's mirror. And this mirror hung in the house that was owned by Bela Lugosi, who played the first Dracula, or the one from the 30s and 40s that was really popular, not like the very first Nosferatu that was a silent movie. But this mirror causes nightmares, and witnesses have seen his image pop up in it, and it was evidently the person who, I believe, bought the house that was owned by Bela Lugosi was murdered. And, you know, the story has it that this mirror witnessed that murder. And, you know, so you can see bloody images in it and stuff like that. And this one is also in Zach Bagans' museum out in Las Vegas. Mirrors can also be a ritual tool used by witches and, you know, psychics for divination. It's called scrying. They are also portals. So you can be you have to be very careful if someone has like enchanted or trapped a spirit in a mirror, something like that. You have to be very, very careful when you're talking about owning a haunted mirror or a haunted piece of furniture and things of that nature. Yeah, mirrors, Alex just typed to mirrors used in magical sessions are said to be portals or doorways to hell. Satanists use them as portals for demons. Witches use them usually for scrying, which is a form of divination to try and see the future. Typically, Wiccans and most witches do not try and do necromancy or deal with demons because it's just too much, you know. Same thing with voodoo and hoodoo. It's dicey, and you get what you get if you start messing with that stuff. You know, almost anything can be turned into something nefarious if you get a possession of your enemy, and you can curse them using it and stuff like that. So you just have to be really careful if you're trying to purposely buy something that's haunted. Another thing that is very, very, very popular, and people you got to take it with a little bit of grain of salt, is jewelry. Now, I have a lot of jewelry, and I'm wearing some right now. These are not just charms, they are talismans. They are imprinted with specific magical intent having to do with protection. Now, they don't have an evil intent to them. They're a protective intent. You heard me say last week that my dogs are protected too. They each one have a St. Francis medal on their collars, and their talismans are intent for protecting my dogs and, keeping them in good health. So not all magical objects are bad. Not all talismans are bad. Not all, magical jewelry is bad. But if somebody's telling you that it's haunted, that it was, charmed by a Wiccan priestess, that it was charmed by a voodoo priestess, that it was this, that, and the other, if you get it on eBay, you're probably getting took, number one. But if it's honest to God, like mourning jewelry from the Victorian era, there is a lot of grief in these pieces of jewelry because the women took the hair of their loved ones and made them into bracelets. They were embedded into rings under resin. They were woven into earrings with jet. A lot of Victorian jewelry that were made of jet, and up until like the early, like into the Art Deco era, into like even the 1920s, that was mourning jewelry. So if you buy antique jewelry, just know that a lot of that has a lot of grief, a lot of pain behind it. That jewelry can bring you depression, make you feel that grief, make you feel that pain. It can make you feel, a wife's loss of her husband, or a child. And you need to be very careful of that. Now, if you happen to actually get a haunted piece of jewelry, you need to be careful of old poison rings. From the Victorian era, because that's just got bad junk all over it. And they were very popular in the Victorian era, because a lot of women kept small quantities of laudanum in their poison rings and would flip it in their drinks, and then they could just be happy little dope heads. And it was the 1860s version of Mother's Little Helper. And there were a tremendous amount of opiate addicts during the Victorian era. So those are two types of jewelry that you really need to think twice about buying the authentic thing. If you buy the authentic thing, you have to know how to handle it. Now, there are some really, really famous pieces of jewelry that have long-standing curses attached to it. The most well-known is the Hope Diamond. And, everybody knows pretty much the story of the Hope Diamond. Almost, I think every owner of the Hope Diamond met a grisly end. and it is currently resided in the Smithsonian Institution. Another one that is also very famous is the Koh-i-Noor. And it was actually, it belonged to a king of Persia, and it ended up in the possession of the crown, and it is actually incorporated into the crown jewels now. And it gives, legend has it, it gives off the need for bloodlust and like warfare so much that only women are allowed to wear that crown. So that is the legend behind the Koh-i-Noor diamond. You know, and there are other ones that are really, really famous. The chances of any of us ever possessing anything like either of those are none. So, you know, but the chances of you, you know, being interested in collecting like, you know, a piece of mourning jewelry or something like that, just be very careful, because you have to remember the pain that was behind them. I personally have some experience. Alex and I did an investigation. It was actually on my niece's house down in Powhatan, Virginia. She had a lot of stuff going on down there. You know, she had some Native American stuff going on outside. She had a nasty man on the inside of the house, and, you know, it was just all kinds of stuff. Well, when she moved from that house, when they were cleaning out everything, my sister happened to find a ring shoved up inside one of the kitchen cabinets. And dingbat, my sister took this really beautiful turquoise ring home with her. Well, guess what? All the kitchen cabinet doors started opening and closing on their own, and all kinds of stuff started slamming in her house 20 miles away. So my sister had taken this residual energy home with her. The next day, she called me flipping out, and I was like, Sandra, I said, you know better than this. She said, well, I didn't think about that. And she said, my God, I didn't think I'd bring that darn ghost home with me. And I was like, all right. I said, Sandy, do you have any sage in the house and a rosemary? She's like, well, yeah. I said, throw that ring in a Ziploc bag, throw the sage and the rosemary on it, and I'll come down and get it. So that's exactly what she did. I got it, brought it home, cleansed it properly. Luckily, it was just some, you know, low level, you know, pissed off dude. Residual energy. It was nothing big to deal with. Handled it, cleansed it, and my boyfriend wears it now with absolutely no issues. And it's a beautiful, you know, Navajo turquoise ring. Cleansing of the objects can be done, but you got to know what you're doing. Another thing, people seem to want to own haunted houses. Now, unless you know what the history of the property is and you know what you're going into, you need to do your research, because you don't know what you're getting into. You know, you need to research the property history, the property owners. If you've ever seen that show, The Dead Files, where, you know, the guy on the show, Steve Deshavi, kind of like goes to the town's real estate office, and he goes to the town archives and all that kind of stuff, and kind of researches the addresses that they investigate. That's what you need to do. You need to research the area history and everything. Like where Alex and I, you know, we live in Virginia. Virginia is nothing but Civil War and American Revolution war sites, and French-American War, and I mean, just war all over the place. You name it, we've had it here. And so there are battlefields all over the place. I actually live in Manassas, not far from Manassas Junction. You know, Alex lives not far from another battle site. So, you have to additionally realize, like, especially, if you live out west, research what was Native American land. You have to know what you're getting into, because properties are extremely hard to clear, completely clear, especially when it involves Native American spirit, because not all Native American spirit are person born or soul born. They're otherworldly, and that's going to be another topic for another day. And you can't do that. You can't clear that kind of energy unless you've got a shaman and a whole lot of stuff. You can kind of calm things down and make peace with them, but you're not going to get rid of them. You're not going to get rid of them. All we did at my niece's house in Powhatan, because she had some pissed off Native American, like elemental spirits and stuff in her backyard, we made an offering to them, and she was good until her neighbor mowed her grass and cut down the tree, the sapling that we had done in the offering, and then all hell literally started breaking it loose again outside. So she ended up just moving to get away from it all. So like I said, you can make peace with them, but you're not going to get rid of them. And unless you, especially in cases of demonic possessions and like a full-blown exorcism, most people don't want to even go down that road. So you really need to do your research to know what you're getting into. The last thing I really want to go over is what I call tchotchkes. And these are other little kind of things that you can't really, classify into any other of those big groups, like little music boxes or little icons or something like that. And these are also really kind of popular for people to try and want to collect. One of the most famous ones is known as, it's called the crone. And it's a hand-carved kind of effigy of a human form. And it's a woman, but it has a stained noose around her neck, and it has nails through her eyes. And what happens is people who have it, there are poltergeist manifestations around it. So in other words, stuff starts flying around all over the house. And people see the manifestation of an old woman or a crone that is soaking wet. They smell like pond water, and like the stench. And then they also see wet barefoot prints. This is also possessed now by the Traveling Museum of the Paranormal and Occult. There is also, people like to collect haunted paintings or paintings that have a history. And one of the most famous ones is a painting called The Hands Resist 'Em. Resist Him. I'm sorry, my southern twang is coming out there. The Hands Resist Him. And it was painted in 1972 by an artist named Bill Stoneham. And it's a picture of a little boy that's standing next to a really creepy looking doll. And supposedly the figures on the canvas move. They leave the canvas. The two people who originally displayed and reviewed this painting in other words, put it up in a gallery and gave a critic review of this painting, died within a year of doing so. So I'm not sure where that one is. It may be held in a private collection now. Now, there are 5 big ways that things typically kind of are associated with haunted objects. Like stuff, your possessions start moving around on their own. You have an apparition that manifests, or shadow people that all of a sudden start coming around. You have someone in the house starts experiencing frequent nightmares. In other words, more than 3 times a week. Really bad luck starts happening. That means like injuries in the home, incidences with your plumbing or your electrical, small fires, things like that. And then a lot more frequent illnesses. Now, I mentioned before that there are things that you can kind of do to deal with this stuff. Now, a lot of it I would not particularly recommend that anyone in here do on their own. I'm going to emphasize this. That's why I really do not recommend that you purposely buy or collect things that you know are definitely haunted. Spiritual cleansings of the object and the home can be done. In other words, a spiritual cleansing is basically a rite of exorcism. It's a fancy, nice, PC term for a rite of exorcism. And that is what it is. It is a rite of exorcism. Especially if it is a particularly nasty, if you are a nasty person in life, you're going to be a nasty person in spirit, period. And demons, don't even want to mess with it. Let somebody else do it. And it has to be someone who's qualified to deal with that level of malevolence. A lot of times, sometimes an object you'll see, like in some of the shows, like on the Haunted Collector, you would see them put them in like a glass cloche and then put a ring of salt around the object and then put the cloche on it and stuff like that. Well, sometimes you can cleanse it with salt, but like on some pieces of jewelry, like that turquoise, I knew that I cannot cleanse turquoise with salt because it would have eaten the stone up. So what I had to do was cleanse it with rosemary, sage, and lavender and put it outside during a cycle of a full moon, and then it was cleansed. But that was for just residual energy of a cranky old dude that left behind a ring in my niece's house. He was not anything to deal with. He just happened to have pissed me off when we were doing this investigation. And, it is what it is. The third thing that can be done is you have to return the haunted object to its original location. In other words, wherever it came from. And a lot of times, if you bought it from somebody, you don't know where it came from. And you're not going to know where it came from. So it's your problem to deal with. Sometimes, if it's particularly involved with, like a person, it can be buried in a graveyard because that's hallowed ground. However, most states, if you go burying stuff in a graveyard, you're going to get charged with a felony. I know in Virginia, it is a felony to go digging around in a graveyard. So you don't want to do that. You don't ever want to do that unless, like I'm from way back in the woods in West Virginia, and we had a family cemetery. So the last time I was up there, I, got graveyard dirt from the family cemetery. You don't ever, 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 I was just getting to that, Alex. Alex sent me a reminder. You do not ever bury objects on your own property, because that's not getting rid of it. You still own it. If you bury it on your property, it's still your problem. The last thing, some people, as a last resort, say that you can burn stuff. Never, 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 ever, 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 never, never, ever, ever. I don't know how many times I'm going to say this. Don't ever friggin' burn anything that you think is haunted. Don't burn a daggone Ouija board. Don't throw it in the trash. Contact somebody that knows how to properly deal with it, okay? There is a way to deal with some stuff. There is a way to bind the energy to that thing and then to properly let the earth take care of the problem, okay? Don't ever, 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 how many times have I got to say this? Throw a Ouija board in your trash pile to burn, in your fireplace to burn, in your, out. Don't, never, ever. Because what happens is you released whatever entity or energy was bound to that object. You then release that out. And you can become possessed. You can become oppressed. You can develop an attachment. And just don't do it. I can't stress that enough. Don't ever do it. Did I say don't burn anything? Okay, I think I've made my point. Okay, guys, that's about it for tonight. I love talking to you guys, and we will see you next week. It is, okay? Good night, everybody. Be well.